Hey all you cats and kittens and all you non-binary fittins, it's your boy DBiddles. Welcome to Chatbots. If you watched the last episode I put out, the one I have retroactively labeled as Episode 0, you know how this goes. I've got a model kit, I'm gonna put it together, and while I'm at it, I'm gonna talk through some of the things floating around in my brain juices. Last time we put together the Gundam Ariel, and this time, as you can see, we have Shin Getter 1 from Shin Getter Robo. Getter Robo? What is that? I have never heard of that. Oh, that's totally understandable, hypothetical audience member. Sadly, it hasn't really had much of a strong presence in the US despite its success and influence in its home country, so allow me to educate you. The genre of super robot anime and manga got its start in the early 70s with Go Nagai, who could kind of be described as like a Japanese Stan Lee. Robots and extra big robots had been around since the days of Astro Boy, Tetsujin 28, Giant Robo, 8-Man, and Cyborg 009. But the first piloted giant robot was Nagai's own Mazinger Z. Nagai's breakout hit, Horenshi Gakuin, had garnered him a lot of attention for being what would later be referred to as the first ecchi manga, which, for the uninitiated, is kind of like a sex comedy. Ecchi is a term for a series that heavily features pretty girls or occasionally boys in frequently racy outfits or situations and has a lot of sophomoric gags and scenarios. He then followed that up with the highly successful and influential Devilman manga and anime, and then just a few months later he struck again with Mazinger Z, which was successful enough to receive a number of sequels and theatrical specials. So yeah, man cranked out the hits, and I haven't even mentioned a lot of his other successful and influential works like Cutie Honey, Kekko Kamen, Violence Jack, Shuten Doji, and others. But anyways, Nagai had a lot of hits, and Mazinger Z was an extra big hit. And unlike some of his earlier works like Devilman and Horenshi Gakuin, it had the additional benefit of being a little more general audiences marketable. And so anime studio Toei, which was making sick bank off of licensing his work for anime and toys, called on him to make more stuff like Mazinger that they could put on the air and also turn into toys. Japan was definitely on that unregulated hyper-capitalist Reagan-era children's media kick way before America, so that definitely played into how the landscape of pop culture developed over there. Mazinger Z begat Great Mazinger, who begat UFO Robo Grendizer, and so on. Nagai would go on to produce a number of other super robot shows that aren't related to Mazinger, such as Kotetsu Jig, Gaiking, Riser X, but the very next giant robot anime that Toei produced was Getter Robo, which Nagai would co-create with his buddy Ken Ishikawa. That said, while Nagai did contribute to the original Getter Robo run, Ishikawa's work was definitely the primary force in shaping Getter Robo and carrying it forward. So Mazinger was about a single guy piloting a big robot to fight an army of evil robots commanded by a mad scientist and his handful of supervillain sidekicks, right? Meanwhile, Getter Robo featured a team of 3 pilots with distinct, frequently competing personalities having to combine their individual machines together to form their giant robot, which they then used to do battle against an ancient society of dinosaurs who have spent the last few millennia under the Earth's surface, but who now wish to return to the surface and reclaim their position of dominancy over the Earth. So just right off the bat, we have a number of differences that set Getter apart, and the first, most obvious one is the combination or gatai element. I'm not an expert in the Japanese language, but my hunch is that the term Getter in Getter Robo is a play off the term gatai, meaning its name is something roughly like Combo Robot. So before Voltron, before Megazords, there was Getter Robo. But something extra cool about this original combining giant robot is that depending on the order in which the 3 Getter machines are put together, you can actually get 3 different forms of Getter Robo instead of always forming the same single robot. And they would frequently use this feature to their advantage, separating and reforming into a different robot in battle, or even just separating to avoid enemy attacks. But there's a number of other differences from Mazinger that would kind of inform a different set of themes from that original work. For example, their enemies. Like I said earlier, Mazinger had Dr. Hell, great name, I know, and his army of henchmen and foot soldiers and their supply of ancient robot monsters to throw at Mazinger in a bid to take over the world. but the dinosaur empire is attempting to reclaim their hold on the world. They once were the dominant species, the apex sapient beings, but they were forced into hiding with the coming of the Getter rays, radiation from space that is lethal to the saurians but does not harm the other species of the Earth, particularly the apes who would evolve into humans. Getter rays, or Getter radiation, isn't just dinosaur kryptonite and the stuff that makes your cool robot work, but it's also apparently the cosmic force of evolution, and it also sort of reacts to or is generated from the willpower and teamwork of human beings. So right there we have another pretty special thing that helped to shape this anime. You have the obvious theming in your old versus the new, of archaic superstitious cult of tradition being the enemy of progress and growth and modernity and togetherness. The dinosaurs had their time for millions of years, and now it's time for the next generation, humanity, to carry on in its place. But this older generation is reluctant to let go of power and allow progress to occur. But you also have some early examples of some familiar anime tropes. Not just combining robots, but things like the power of friendship and screaming makes my attacks more powerful, which has definitely had a profound impact on most of your ultra-popular shonen titles. And so, Getter Robo was also a massive success, helping to co-define the super robot genre, and thus did it begat Getter Robo G, and then many years later begat Getter Robo Go, and Shin Getter Robo, and Getter Robo Arc, and so on. So DBiddles, how do I get on the Getter train? Well, like I said, the localization of the various anime series outside of Japan hasn't been a very successful venture for the Getter franchise. Getter Robo G was partially brought over once as part of an anthology series known as Force 5 that aired briefly in the 80s, where it was renamed Starvengers. A dedicated collector might find a few episodes of Starvengers preserved on VHS or bargain bin bootleg DVDs. A number of the shorter Getter OVA series did make it over, including Getter Robo Armageddon, that this handsome boy here is from, but they're all kind of reboots or sequel boots and not exactly great introductions for the series. That said, Armageddon is pretty dope if you're into edgy 90s OVAs with awesome animation. Most of the Getter fandom agrees, though, that the definitive Getter experience is the manga by Ishikawa himself. Pity, almost none of it has made it stateside in any official capacity. The first Tonkobon volume of Getter Robo Go made it over in the form of 7 floppy comic book issues retitled Venger Robo from Viz Media back when that was the primary way we got manga. So until Discotech or 7 Seas license it, your options are limited. That said, if you ever wanted to experience the spirit of Getter, my all-time number 1 favorite anime ever, Gurren Lagann, is heavily inspired by Getter Robo, as stated by series co-creator Kazuki Nakashima. And that series, dear friends, is available on Blu-ray through Right Stuff, or most assuredly through one of the many streaming services out there if you fancy a look. And if I'm not careful, this video would devolve into a gush sesh about how much I love Gurren Lagann and its cast of lovable, dynamic characters, the over-the-top, heaven-piercing action scenes, the blood-pumping music, the stellar animation that would lead into the creation of Studio Trigger, the themes of indomitable confidence and perseverance, and oh shit, here I am, I'm doing it, I'm doing the thing. Listen, if you had to take one recommendation from me, make it that you should at least check out Gurren Lagann. I feel it iterates on what Getter Robo does, while also elevating it in a way that makes it stand on its own, and stand quite tall for that matter. Further, it also provides something of a spiritual conclusion to Getter, as Ken Ishikawa passed away after having penned only a few volumes of what was intended to be the epic grand finale to the Getter saga, Getter Robo Arc. Anyways, now you know all that stuff, let's switch gears to the main topic of the video so I don't have to keep saying Getter Robo. So hey, remember that time Netflix tried to adapt Cowboy Bebop? It was only a little over a year ago, but it feels like it's been way longer. I guess original series creator Shinichiro Watanabe recently tried watching the adaptation and barely started the first episode before being put off on it entirely. Which seems pretty harsh. Now make no mistake, I'm not going to sit here and act like Netflix Bebop was as good as the original, or even something that I myself felt motivated to get all the way through. My wife and I made it through 5 episodes before putting it down and never really picking it back up again. But I don't think it was god-awful. I actually think it's pretty unfairly maligned. Now, before you get ahead of me, this isn't one of those Series X is good, actually videos. Frankly, this project never stood a chance. This was an attempted readaptation of a near-perfect seminal favorite of anime canon, particularly here in the States. The kind of thing that has been watched and rewatched to death by die-hard fans. Nothing that could have been produced would have ever been good enough for people, and even beyond that, Bebop's a very deliberately finite series, and streaming series are theoretically about retaining subscribers with long meandering seasons that end in cliffhangers. You know, assuming they aren't cancelled a few seasons in because viewership isn't high enough. And of course, the material that Netflix Bebop chose to expand on, to drag out the runtime and put off the inevitable ending that the series is famous for, was expanding on characters who in the original series have maybe 5 minutes of screen time, whose mystique is central to their role in the narrative. And of course, they got some really hammy soap opera actors to play these roles, so they were pretty excruciating to sit through. Not to mention a lot of the punchy, beautifully choreographed action that the original has known for was trimmed down or occurs off screen. Okay, so all of that is true. But, credit where credit was due, it's clear that the people working on this series had a pretty strong passion for the source material. It's clear that while they had to make some creative decisions that weren't well received, they did at least care about this project and wanted to do it right. Like, look at Dragon Ball Evolution, where it's clear no one working on that had a clue or gave a shit, and then look at this and tell me that the love wasn't present. Look at Blood the Last Vampire, or Ghost in the Shell, or Netflix's attempt at Death Note, and then look at this and tell me that this is as bad as any of those. The 3 leads, John Cho, Mustafa Shakir, and Daniela Pineda as Spike, Jet, and Faye respectively, all gave admirable performances, with Shakir especially almost sounding identical to Beau Billingsley's line reads for Jet. The sets and props all replicate that rustic, dystopian, ramshackle sci-fi feel of the original. The trademark music is lifted practically unaltered from the soundtrack, and as far as I watched, most of the episodes were attempting to replicate plots of episodes from the original. Short of a shot-for-shot remake, this was as good as any Bebop adaptation was ever going to get. And while I didn't super love it, and I don't expect anyone else to be even as charitable as I was, from what I saw, there was a decent number of people who watched it, both those new to Bebop and those familiar, who did enjoy it. Netflix Bebop was cancelled within like a month of dropping, but not necessarily because it deserved it, and certainly not because it went woke and therefore went broke, or whatever smooth-brained take dribbled out of the quartering's mouth as he drunkenly muttered to himself while lying face down in a puddle of his own basement urine. It was cancelled for all the usual reasons. It was an expensive project to make, and another season wouldn't have justified the expense based on initial viewings. Anime fans were skeptical, and those who chose to wait and see got put off by the hyperbolic reactions of almost everyone who watched it first, most especially from those who cut content by providing polarizing, bombastic reactions to every new piece of high-profile pop culture that comes down the pipe. And because streaming services famously drop things abruptly when they aren't mega hits. For every Stranger Things or Mandalorian, there's a dozen things like Inside Job, MODOK, Warrior Nun, Santa Clarita Diet, Swamp Thing, Paper Girls, Lovecraft County, Midnight Gospel, She-Hulk, Book of Boba Fett, Altered Carbon, etc. that just end because they're trying to fire off content all the time, hoping for the next huge thing rather than settling for something that might grow into being bigger. They're all chasing the bag. That 90s show gets almost instantly renewed for a season 2 because it costs like nothing to produce, especially if they still had those original sets lying around on some dusty lot somewhere, and especially because all the expensive actors are relegated to cameos, and the main cast are a bunch of no-name kids whom you can hire for the price of college tuition and some Robux. But Bebop has all kinds of action sequences, sets, costumes, props, VFX, licensing fees, all of which costs a bit more to keep the content machine running. If they both pull in roughly the same amount of viewers, well, one of them isn't going to get a continuation. It was true for network television, it's true now. The people investing money into this stuff aren't interested in producing art, they're interested in producing profit. As far as they're concerned, art is just an occasional and accidental byproduct of this process. The people who actually work on this stuff are sincerely trying, but their output is beholden to the desires of the people signing the checks. And it's also possible that some of those sincere artists just don't fully deliver as they intended. But it hardly matters. The Netflix adaptation is a meme now. Bebop was cancelled. Anime fans are reflexively predisposed to hate all live-action anime adaptations. The end, right? Well, no, actually. A number of live-action anime adaptations or anime-adjacent adaptations are in the works, and meanwhile, everybody's working up big gutfuls of bitter, resentful bile to retch up on cue when the time comes for these projects to drop. Only so many of them are in production, but it's clear that there are intents for a lot of Japanese franchises to be another big source of Hollywood's machine of serving up remakes, reboots, sequels, prequels, reimaginings, relaunches, spin-offs, and continuations of all the stuff that you already like. And, why wouldn't they? As I already said, Hollywood's a business. They're out to make money. If they know something already sells, why wouldn't they try to sell more of it? Especially in this social media area where half the marketing for your new thing can just be the existing fan base getting all jazzed up about it and posting speculation articles or trailer reactions. And frankly, for some of you, it doesn't even matter how bad the word of mouth is. The fear of missing out on the next superhero or Lord of the Rings or Ghostbusters or Transformers is going to keep you coming back, going to lead you to watch it so you can form your own opinion. That's not a criticism, by the way, it works on me too. You put a Ninja Turtle or a Batman in it and I'm going to fucking watch it. I'm a nerd, I'm a dork. That basically means that I'm a walking piggy bank for whomever owns the IPs that I like. Don't pretend like you're not the same. Don't pretend like you don't have things that you soy face over whenever another iteration of that thing is announced. But contrary to public opinion, the Sauron eye of Hollywood turning its gaze to all our favorite Chinese cartoons shouldn't be treated as an automatic portent of doom. In fact, anyone immediately coming to that conclusion is letting their dipshit show. Oh yeah, now we're gonna get kinda spicy. Some of what I'm about to say might come across as snarky, but bear in mind, it's not personal. I just need to communicate this hot take effectively, and frankly, a lot of you just really need to get over Dragon Ball Evolution and the Shyamalan Avatar movie. It's over. It's in the past. Those movies can't hurt you anymore. Not if you don't let them. It's time to move on to healthy relationships with live-action adaptations. The fear of bad movies happening is probably a holdover from that Bayformers Gamergate nostalgia critic era of raging man-children howling on the internet about how their childhood was the victim of a sexual assault because they watched a bad movie. But bad movies and TV shows happen all the time because content in general is happening all the time. We get over it. We move on to the next thing. There's a million new things getting added to the pop culture landscape every day. I know it sucks when an adaptation or a sequel of something you love doesn't pan out favorably, but you can't have the good media if you don't risk having bad media. And I mean, come on. You all apparently creamed your fucking jeans at not one but 2 Sonic the Hedgehog live-action films. 2 Sonic the Hedgehog films which I refuse to believe were any better written than the Smurfs or Chipmunks movies, but apparently daring to dream of a cool adaptation of Macross makes me an idiot. Like it or not, the looming specter of capitalism means this sort of thing is gonna keep happening, so you might as well get used to that fact, and it wouldn't kill you either to maybe try having an open mind, or dare I say it, even a little bit of hype for it. If for no other reason than practice makes perfect, and by sheer probability when enough of these start happening, at least a few are gonna seriously rock your stupid naysaying ass, and aren't you going to look like a fucking moron for having doubted when that happens? In fact, it kind of already has. Like I said, a lot of this boils down to Hollywood being a business, and businesses prefer to sell things that are proven hits rather than take a chance on something new that isn't a proven earner. There's plenty of creative people who have their own ideas that they want to pitch, but to get the clout that they need to do those, they might first have to play ball and adapt some of those big, expensive IPs that their parent company bought to make money. Or else, it's entirely possible that the adaptation is a passion project for that person. Anybody watch Alita Battle Angel? It's one of the few unironically good anime manga adaptations by Western creatives out there. You should definitely check it out if you're having doubts about all of this. Or, just check it out regardless because it's dope. Anyways, apparently James Cameron has been in love with this story since like the 90s when Guillermo del Toro introduced him to the manga, and he'd been shopping this pitch around to studios for decades. And when he finally got his chance, the movie debuted in 2019, he was so busy he apparently had to have Robert Rodriguez actually direct it for him. And again, it worked out. It's obviously the first in a trilogy, so who even knows if those other two films will ever even happen, but God, I kinda hope so. I like this way more than that sexy blue alien Ferngully movie series that Cameron's working on. It's clear that there was a lot of love put into this thing. Some people love these stories so much that they would jump at the chance to leave their mark on the franchise, to play around in the world created by another person, and maybe bring something unique to that world. And eventually, with enough practice, the good ones will end up being the rule a lot more often than the exception.
But why adapt stuff at all? It's like you're implying that animation isn't good enough.
Well, that's a stupid thing to say. Why adapt stuff? To bring it to a wider audience, that's why. To get those ideas out to as many people as possible who might not see them if they're only to be found in some book or more obscure piece of media. Tell me, how many of you fans of Japanese media are strict manga or light novel only people? Probably not that many. A lot of you probably got on board to so many cool series through anime. And while I adore animation, let's face facts that it has a stigma of being some kind of more niche medium, no matter how many Simpsons, Rick and Morty's, BoJack Horseman's, or Ghibli films push their way into mainstream acceptance. Not a lot of people have much interest in comic books either. They're frequently considered inaccessible and the sort of things for nerds and dorks. But if the last 3 decades of film and television is anything to go by, it sure seems like an awful lot of non-comic readers like comic book stories. I mean, there's Marvel and DC superheroes, obviously, but there's also The Walking Dead, The Boys, Preacher, Sandman, Lock and Key, Lucifer, Kick-Ass, Kingsman, Watchmen, Ghost World, Ninja Turtles, Static Shock, Resident Alien, The Crow, The Mask, Barbarella, The Addams Family, V for Vendetta, Invincible, DuckTales, Men in Black, Tales from the Crypt, Popeye, Heavy Metal, Cyber 6, Tank Girl, Hellboy, I could go on. Those were all originally comics. Why did we need to adapt them? It's like you're implying that comics on their own aren't good enough. Say, any of you guys like Jurassic Park? That was a fucking book before it became everyone's favorite childhood movie. How many of you Dexter fans would be Dexter fans without a TV show adapting the book series? How many Game of Thrones fans? The Hunger Games, American Gods, 50 Shades of Grey, Dracula, Frankenstein, True Blood, Hannibal Lecter, Fight Club, Coraline, You, Charlotte's Web, Willy Wonka, Blade Runner, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Outlander, Matilda, The Grinch, John Carpenter's The Thing, The Sound of Thunder, The Wheel of Time, James and the Giant Peach, A Wrinkle in Time, Ender's Game, Hellraiser, Starship Troopers, The Invisible Man, Ready Player One, Johnny Mnemonic, To Kill a Mockingbird, World War Z, most of the classic Disney movies, just about every Stephen King book. Bro, I could do this all day, and I bet a bunch of those were things you didn't even know were adaptations. Have any of you guys ever tried reading the Lord of the Rings books? Because good God, Tolkien is kind of a slog to read through. But those movies, though. And I know that J.K. Rowling is proving to be just kind of the worst kind of person ever. Turf cunt! Excuse me. But remember how excited you were to share the Harry Potter movies with your parents so they could see what you were all geeked out about? Hey, how many of your parents who don't play video games are watching The Last of Us and loving it? I don't know, wouldn't it be kinda cool to finally be able to discuss the genderqueer dissection of fairy tale tropes presented in Revolutionary Girl Utena with your in-laws without having to disavow the notion that all anime is about collectible cartoon animals, screaming Super Saiyans, and schoolgirls getting molested by cephalopods? I don't know, I think that would be cool. Not just that, but as I hinted at with the Lord of the Rings just a minute ago, an adaptation is an opportunity to rework some ideas so that they work better. You know, the Ghost in the Shell anime is a far cry from the original manga by Shiro Masamune. See, Masamune is not all that interested in transhumanism or standalone complexes, you know, the stuff that make Ghost in the Shell a fan favorite anime. He's mostly just interested in drawing sexy girls holding guns. And you know what? No shame, King. Or you know, there's that meme going around about how The Last of Us deviates from the source material by not having Joel die over and over again at the hard parts in the video game. I don't know, a frustrating video game experience does kinda detract from the narrative, and I haven't played it, but I'm willing to bet that the gameplay of that series isn't exactly the reason it sticks with audiences. Hey, did you know that in Stephen King's It, there's an extended sequence where all the child characters have an orgy? Fucking yikes, dog. Pretty glad we can experience the story without that being part of it. You know, I'm a pretty big fan of comic books, but one of the ones that I don't really care much for, despite being in the minority opinion on this, is Infinity Gauntlet, the comic that was the loose basis for the third and fourth Avengers movies. Very glad that they didn't stick too close to that story. Or hey, who would have guessed that The Boys would be such a hit? Just about everyone agrees that the show is very cool, while the comic it's based on is kinda mid. And you know, it's not like the greedy gaijins in Hollywood are the only people who have ever tried to turn a profit on anime and manga adaptations. Japanese film studios have been doing it themselves for decades, with titles like Rurouni Kenshin, Attack on Titan, Tokyo Ghoul, Bleach, Mob Psycho, Full Metal Alchemist, Assassination Classroom, Devilman, Cutie Honey, Kekko Kamen, Uzumaki, Lone and Wolf and Cub, Parasite, Relife, Great Teacher Onizuka, Patlabor, City Hunter, Yataman, Gantz, Old Boy, Sukeban Deka, Erased, Super Sentai, Kamen Rider, Crying Freeman, La Blue Girl, Death Note, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and way more. And hey, maybe some of this stuff draws people into checking out the source material. You ever consider that? How many books, comics, or manga did you check out because you were a fan of the movies, shows, or anime? Are you saying you don't want that for manga too? Fucking don't be a gatekeeper. Gatekeeping is very cringe. So I hope I've made a strong case for why live-action anime adaptations are a cool, worthwhile idea. But does that mean that I have confidence in every such potential project? Fuck no, don't be ridiculous, dude. Just because I'm advocating for optimism and open minds doesn't mean I want you to discard all skepticism or critical thought. You know, I love Evangelion, but I don't think a live-action Evangelion is a great idea. I've been wrong before. I was very skeptical about The Sandman, but season 1 of that made me a believer. But I think it's okay to have varying degrees of enthusiasm when approaching an adaptation of a beloved title, especially depending on whether the adaptation is an attempt at a movie or a series and who's working on it. Some things are going to need more room to breathe and develop their worlds, and other things should probably be abbreviated to get out a full story in one go, so you're not left on a cliffhanger with no guarantee for sequels or additional seasons. And not everything needs a full series to get out all the good stuff. Say, DBiddles, isn't there a bunch of announced anime adaptations in the works? And surely you have some ideas for anime you'd like to see get adapted too! How shrewd of you to mention, my astute and beloved viewer. Unfortunately, there is no time left to cover all that as our video is nearing its conclusion. But your last video was way longer, and you control how long this video is via the speed at which you set the build footage. And if you knew there would be limited time, couldn't you have cut out that like 5 or 6 paragraphs at the beginning talking about Getter Robo, since it doesn't really add anything to your central thesis about adaptations? Oh my dear, sweet, adorable viewer, so many questions. Perhaps you'll just have to tune in to the next thrilling installment of ChatBots to find out the answers. Same bot time, same bot channel. That channel, of course, being ChatBots, and that time being whenever I get around to it. This is just a passion project currently. I have a real life job and kid and wife, and I've got to, do stuff to support them. Hey, since I can't say precisely when within the next couple weeks I'll have the next video up, you should subscribe and ring the notifications bell and give a big thumbs up for ChatBots. Or a thumbs down? Maybe you think I done a bad job on this one. Maybe you should tell me why you think so in the comments. Also, in the description, I have my Ko-fi listed, so if you want to sprinkle a couple pennies into my cup, I could use that to buy new robot toys. Like this one here, Zeorhymer of the Heavens from Hades Project Zeorhymer. We're gonna build him next time. Okay, cool. Sayonara, bye-bye!